Joining us, MS Now senior national security reporter David Rohde, New York Times White House correspondent Tyler Pager, and MS Now senior investigative reporter Carol Leonnig. Tyler, add to the reporting about what this jet does not have.
Yeah, so we don't have a full picture of exactly what this jet does and does not have. And I think that's part of the concern from national security officials, members of Congress that we've heard about. And Katie, these concerns are not new. There were lawmakers and former national security officials, former Air Force officials who were raising these concerns over the last year because Donald Trump made it very clear that he wanted this plane ready for him as soon as possible. So my colleagues have done, and a lot of journalists have done a lot of reporting about the concerns about the speed at which Trump was demanding this plane to be retrofitted. And so even though, this is this has just come online, this has been something that lawmakers have been raising concerns about for quite some time. And so the plane, what's, sort of striking about this, Katie, is this was really one of the first trips he was taking on the plane. He debuted it just before July 4th, and this was the first international trip he was taking using this Qatari donated jet. And so what we know from speaking to officials familiar with it is that it lacks some of the defensive anti-missile capabilities that the old Air Force One that presidents have been using for decades has. The full scope of what it does and does not have, we've posed those questions to the White House. They have not answered them. But we know that there are some capabilities, particularly as it relates to defensive capabilities, that it does not have. And Secret Service warned that given the resumption of hostilities with Iran, I was in Turkey with Trump covering the NATO summit. And while we were there, he was instructing the U.S. military to launch missiles at Iran. And just to put it in perspective, Katie, Ankara, Turkey, which is where the summit was, is roughly 1,000 miles from Tehran. So he's in the region resuming a war, and that caused concern for the Secret Service.
Yeah, I mean, the proximity to a dangerous spot is concerning, that he would feel comfortable taking that jet, that he would, he's allowed to do whatever he wants. He's the president, but that he wouldn't have taken more precautions. The Air Force, David, does admit that this plane is not the same as the last plane in terms of what it has included in it. This is a June 19th Air Force statement noting that the team made trades. That's their words. No risk was taken in security, safety, or mission communications, but the collective team made trades on some of the less commonly used mission sets that Boeing must deliver to support the next 40 years. Can you help me understand what less commonly used mission sets means?
This is not a less commonly used one, but one of the big questions I know is the communication systems from this plane. One of the challenges, and I think if Tyler or Carol knows more than I do at this point, but if he's going to launch strikes or any kind of military operations that put American forces in danger, you want the president to have 24/7 communication possibilities. You don't want them in the air over the Atlantic, unable to respond to what's happening on the ground. So that's
encrypted
one question.
Communication,
yes, and secure, that definitely existed in the old jet. And then a separate thing that national security officials brought up when this whole deal was proposed. One concern is listening devices in this plane that may have been put in it before when the Qataris were using it, but to strip everything out of the plane and make sure there's nothing in it. I was told when this all happened about a year ago, they would have to disassemble the plane, inspect everything, and then put it all back together. And so there were no estimates that you could turn this around within a year and have it, the safety measures you want and the capabilities you want.
So it goes back, Tyler, to reporting that the New York Times and you did back in 2025, the investigation into the search for this new plane, how much Donald Trump wanted this. You wrote back then, Mr. Witkoff, an old friend from Mr. Trump's early days in New York's real estate. We know about Mr. Witkoff now quite well. Well, he knew the Qataris well. He got in touch with the Qataris to ask about the plane. So was Donald Trump searching this out?
Yeah, as you heard that from that clip you played with Sean Hannity, he was publicly saying he was unsatisfied with the current Air Force One. And let's just put this in perspective. Presidents have, it's not just Donald Trump who was unsatisfied with this plane. There has been a years-long effort to try to get a new Air Force One, and it's been delayed for years. So that's sort of the baseline. But the plane was supposed to be delivered by the end of his term, and Donald Trump wasn't happy with it. So he was publicly saying he was unhappy with this plane, and he wanted a better one, or in his words, a better one that he could use in his second term. And so, as my colleagues reported, I was not on the story, but my fantastic colleagues wrote this great story that just sort of puts into perspective how he got this plane. And very much so, as you just read from it, Steve Witkoff, who is his special envoy to a lot of things, one of them, I guess, is obtaining a plane for Donald Trump.
Carol, the White House had a pretty strong reaction to your reporting.
Yeah, I was surprised by that. We stand by our reporting. We have no concerns about its accuracy. It's very similar in not every way, but very similar to Tyler's great reporting on this as well. And we know from talking to national security officials, both prior and current, that this plane has security issues. You can't just add on surface-to-air missile defense, electromagnetic shielding for a nuclear blast, secure advanced communications that will be absolutely fail-safe. You can't add that to a jet unless you're building it from scratch, and you certainly can't upgrade it in the 15 months since Donald Trump received this gift. And this is something former Air Force generals were warning about for months. We stand by the reporting, and I'm not sure why the White House is so upset about it, because it's not really in dispute that he was urged to take this older and safer plane.
Carol Leonnig, thank you very much. David, I want to get some bigger picture points from you. I ended the introduction to this by pointing out that Donald Trump told the New York Post to basically just carpet bomb Iran if something were to happen to him. Now, he wouldn't have that authority anymore, because if he were gone, that would be the next commander-in-chief's authority. That being said, it does indicate a certain carelessness with the future of the world, Americans, by putting himself into a position where he could more easily, potentially, be assassinated by another country. If the president of the United States is assassinated by Iran, I don't know about you, David, but I would be pretty scared about what happens next.
Yes, you can. If you carpet bomb, that causes a reaction also. So there's a recklessness to it, frankly. And then this continued sort of misunderstanding or belief that bombing is the way to just crush an enemy.
Yeah.
And we've talked about that many times before, but that just has never worked. I mean, I spent, years in Afghanistan, 20 years. The U.S. had total air superiority.
Not in modern times, at least, not since World War II.
And so that's the combination. And then there is the general tone of, bomb them as they have been before, this sort of callousness about.
And what happens next to all of us?
Correct.
What position does he put all of us in? By putting himself in the position of being more vulnerable because he wants cushier seats and nicer faucets and a bigger plane.
And he shouldn't be. The simple thing is he should not be flying this plane outside of the United States.
But should he even be flying it in the United States? And the reason I ask that, I know the plane was not refueled midair after 9/11, but the plane was in the air until they knew that they could safely land it, and they got a sense of what was actually happening on 9/11. It's not crazy to think that they would have needed to stay in the air long enough to need a refueling. So is it even safe for him to fly here?
It's not safe for him to fly here, and you've got to be ready for worst-case scenarios. That would be, frankly, a nuclear attack in the United States, and we see it in all the movies. But literally, Air Force One is supposed to be in the air as a command center refueling for, hours, days, and that you want that. You want command and control by the president, whoever it is, in that situation. So it's the whole approach, taking the plane and then talking about carpet bombing Iran, just shows he either doesn't care or doesn't grasp the importance and the danger of using military force in the way he wants to and riding in the plane that impresses people he thinks most.
Tyler, do you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is Donald Trump doing what he wants, which I think is a major theme of his second term. And the question is, where does he go from here? Does he continue to use this plane around the United States. We saw him get on the plane in the United Kingdom and fly back on it. So the assumption is yes. But what happens when there is another foreign trip? What does he do? And Katie, I think the other thing that's noteworthy here, and you mentioned this earlier, but I think it's important to put a finer point on it. He did not discuss this when he was asked about it. Understandably, there are security concerns before he took flight, but he announced that he was making a change in his itinerary to show the troops the new plane. And then when he was asked leaving the United Kingdom, he said there was no security concern. That is not true. The reason for this change was because the Secret Service said, we need you to make this change. And I think that is just an important point to home in on. And then what's the future of this plane and are they able to get it to a place that it's secure enough? We're not sure. And I think that raises a lot of questions about his safety moving forward.